Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Castro, Senior Director of Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for our Capstone event in our Talent Finance Forum series. Talent Finance rethinks our approach to how we develop and invest in talent, as well as how we manage employment and earnings risks. 3 weeks ago, we released a landmark white paper, which outlines the talent finance framework and includes guiding recommendations for how to design and implement real-world solutions to the current workforce challenges. Since we released that white paper, we've hosted 4 virtual event forums introducing the Talent Finance Initiative to the public, highlighting the public-private partnerships, the financial innovations, and the enabling infrastructure that will transform and support a more transparent, equitable, and accountable talent finance ecosystem. Most of you in the audience today have joined us for those forums, either in real time or by watching the recordings. And we are so pleased that today's session will be interactive and collaborative, since we're eager to hear your thoughts and feedback. In addition to the collaboration tool we will be using during the event, we also invite you to put your questions and comments in the chat feature, which we will be monitoring throughout the event. Finally, I want to express our appreciation to our partners who have been working alongside us as we have launched and built this initiative. Thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the Greater Houston Partnership, and Working Nation. And thank you to our funders, JP Morgan Chase, Cognizant Foundation, Schmidt Futures, Microsoft Philanthropies, and Google.org. Without your generous financial contributions, this work would not be possible. And now I'm pleased to hand it over to my colleagues, Jason Tishko and Peter Beard, who will start our program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our final event in our 5-part event series. I'm Jason Tishko with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I am joined by my colleague, Peter Beard, with the Greater Houston Partnership, and together we are going to provide this opening presentation. What will follow is a brief recorded interview with Raphael Bostic, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And then following Raphael's interview, we will have a panel discussion with some of our partners in the initiative and co-authors of the white paper. That will be quickly followed by some closing remarks and identifying some next steps. But for now, what we wanted to do is remind everyone what this initiative is all about. Sarah did a good job of kind of covering why we're doing this, why we're pursuing this effort, and what activities we've undertaken to date. I'm going to provide a recap and summary of what we've done and what we've learned. But the goal of today is to make this a much more interactive experience. So we have a new collaboration tool that we'll be using to try to get the audience to weigh in and to participate and really help focus our discussion going forward. So, fingers crossed, we hope everything works. We feel pretty confident about it, and we're excited to have a platform that will allow us to engage with all of you in a much more comprehensive way than we have in the past with the chat box. So we want that chat box working. We want you adding your comments and suggestions, but we really encourage you to take advantage of this new platform. We're going to walk you through how to use it. It's going to be very simple. We're going to explain it each step of the way, but it's going to provide you a number of opportunities to tell us more about who you are and what you're interested in, what you've benefited from thus far in the initiative, and how you can help us focus on which priorities are most important to you in the Talent Finance Initiative moving forward. So lots of opportunities for you to weigh in and a series of questions. So we hope you give that platform a try. Again, I want to remind you why we're here. As you see on the screen, we believe we need a new public-private approach for how we finance and invest in talent, and one that is fit for our time and our economy, not one that was built for the past. And we think now is the time. There is an urgent need. There has been an urgent need with changes in the new economy, with how we've managed student debt, and with all the other points of friction in how we finance and underwrite talent pipelines, as well as how we manage downside risk, as we know that there are a number of risks that need to be managed when it comes to sustaining your employment, as well as your earnings. So we think now is the time. We think this is an initiative that could be a big tent approach and bring in a number of players to explore new public-private solutions, but also the enabling infrastructure that is necessary to scale them. So we're excited to kind of, again, recap everything we've learned over the past few weeks. But to get started, we really wanted to begin the interaction, not wait till the end. So we are going to be at several points through this presentation, introducing opportunities for you to make use of this collaboration platform. So if we bring up the next slide, we'll kind of give you the rules of engagement. You should be noticing in the chat box that there will be a link that is going to open up a browser on your computer and take you to this new digital whiteboard. It's called Mural. It's a digital whiteboard and collaboration website where we have pre-designed a template that we will be unveiling and piece by piece. But what it's going to allow you to do is ask some questions and tell us more about you. So please access that link in the chat box, and it will ask you to identify yourself. We encourage you to not remain anonymous, but include your name or your organization. And then you can add your email, but that's optional. We just want you to identify yourself and enter the digital whiteboard. And once you do that, one thing I just wanted to highlight for you, because we may have a lot of people joining, you can go over the animal that's been assigned to you, your little icon at the bottom of your screen. And when you hover over it with your cursor or mouse, it will give you the option to broadcast your cursor or don't show other cursors. If you don't like seeing a lot of cursors buzzing around like gnats on your screen, you could disable that and just hit don't show me cursors, and it'll simplify your view. So we wanted to make sure that you had that option available to you. We are starting with questions 1 and 2. We're going to focus on question 1 right now, and we're going to teach you how to navigate between the two. But consider this our get our feet wet icebreaker to make sure we get acquainted with the tool and find value in it. Again, if you haven't clicked that link, we encourage you to jump in. And we want you to keep that browser open because we are going to introduce questions all along the way and get your feedback. And even after we break and do the pre-recorded video and bring the panel on, the panel is also going to be reacting to that mural and we'll be introducing new questions. So keep it open for the entirety of the meeting if at all possible. But for now, what we would ask is you answer that first question, where are you located? And you could do that by using your cursor and grabbing a pin and putting it on the map for us. So just go ahead and do that. We just want to get a sense of the geography of folks who are here. If for some reason, not for some reason, but if you're not located in the U.S., if you are part of a U.S. territory or if you're an international participant, we do have a box. If you double click on that box, you could generate what's considered a Post-it note. And once you have that Post-it note, you could zoom in on your screen and you could enlarge that Post-it note and you could add text. You could just write where you're from right there, and our team will be on standby to help enlarge, shrink, or move around those Post-it notes to help out as needed. But feel free to explore with that option and let us know where you're at. Yeah, don't worry about breaking anything, have fun with it. And once you're ready, what we're going to ask you to do is move on to question 2. And you'll notice on the right-hand bar, there is an outline tab. And we just unveiled option 2 for you. So when you're ready, you've identified where you're located. We encourage you to click on number 2 in the outline, and it's going to move you to the right. And it's going to allow you to identify which sector you represent. So here, double click in the box that best represents you and create a Post-it note. And then enlarge it, zoom in, enlarge it, add your text. We encourage you to add your name if you're comfortable, your organization, and the scope of your organization. So just because you may be located someplace specific, you may actually have more of a national scope. So we encourage you to let us know a little bit about who you are and your focus area. So you can see an example with mine up there. My name, Jason Tishko, my organization, the U.S. Chamber Foundation, and the scope of our practice is national. All right, Peter, any observations you want to make as folks are entering this information?
Well, when I saw the map, it looked like we had a number of different folks from across the country. And one of the points you always make in the work we do is a team sport. So we have a big team that we can with to be exciting. And then, as we see, this map fill out once again, all the folks that potentially add value And as you know, one of my favorite pieces within talent pipeline management is the value chain. And it really recognizes the fact that people along that entire chain add value. And that's what's going to be taking place here, I think, is how do we create this team representing multiple disciplines to really kind of add the value that needs to be added for our students and folks that are, seeking to change and reskill their talent. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but that's what I see.
No, real good observations. We encourage you to all keep using that. If you're just signing on now, use that link in the chat box and show us where you're located and tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what organization you represent. So while folks are doing that, I think we could come back to the slide deck. And what we wanted to do is just recap a little bit about kind of what was covered within the scope of this initiative, Talent Finance. And the one thing we wanted to bring attention to is, it started with the release of a white paper just a few weeks back. And this white paper tried to make the case for why now, why we need a public-private approach to talent finance and investment. And it introduced a new framework to help us understand all the various issuers and beneficiaries of talent finance products and instruments, and to think through what is the full ecosystem and universe of these investments, and where are their gaps and where are there opportunities to pursue more public-private solutions. So it's not about any one of these innovations, it's about all of them, making them all better, making them all increasingly public-private where possible, so we're all pulling in the same direction, and identifying where gaps need to be addressed. And we, in particular, call attention to where the private sector and employers can really step up and pursue new and innovative approaches for how they underwrite their talent pipelines, both for newly trained and credentialed workers, as well as for incumbent workers. And we wanted to make sure we were creating a new framework for how we organize and understand this ecosystem, and then what to do with it. So the next thing we introduce is 9 guiding principles that should be factored into the development or testing of any new talent finance product or service. I'll come back to those. We also introduced 16 recommendations on where to start. And then we kind of broke them down by what the private sector and employers should start doing differently. And then what are the implications for public investment, whether it's investment in upside opportunity, those education, training, and credentialing opportunities, or in downside risk management. We talked a lot about how we can reinvent the safety net, how we can pursue UI modernization, but both upside and downside financial instruments, and understanding what the private sector could do to lead in new and innovative ways to better dedicate their leadership and resources and capital, but then where the public sector can increasingly align and leverage with those private sector investments while also increasingly incentivizing them. We then included much talk about the infrastructure. So it's not just about the innovations, but if we want them to actually take root, grow, learn from them, and scale them, it's going to take a supporting infrastructure, which is going to look a bit different than the one we have now. Again, we need one fit for our time, not one fit for the past. Throughout the paper, we highlighted 27 examples that kind of go along with those 16 recommendations to show in more concrete ways what we mean by those recommendations. And then we issued a call to action. We didn't want to just produce a white paper that sits on a shelf, but this was really geared towards starting a conversation, one that will lead to action on the ground in states and communities. So we are really hopeful that you all will continue to engage in this initiative, not just as a listener or a participant, but really as a member of this network who is going to be making talent finance your brand and will be working with us to implement some or all of those 16 recommendations. If you haven't had a chance to look at the white paper, we do have the link up there. The slide deck will be made available to you, so you'll be able to have access to that link, but you could just look it up online. It'll be easy to find, but that's where we started with the white paper, and we built an event series around kind of the pacing of that paper to introduce the various themes and elements, but I'll come back to that. If we go to the next slide. So we introduced the definition. So talent finance isn't everything, but what it specifically refers to is the development and use of both public and private instruments for how we align investments in talent development, both for upside opportunity and downside employment and income risks. So it's both and, two sides of the same coin. We need to make sure we have not only the upside opportunity investments so people could pursue opportunity, but also have the right financial toolkit in place to manage downside risk, which is going to be ever present in the new economy. And we introduced these guiding principles as a way of thinking about how to design and test these new instruments. We believe they must be increasingly public and private, creating both shared value while also sharing in the risk of the investment, We think it's going to be critical that they expand choice, not limit choice for a wide variety of pathways and opportunities where the financial instrument could follow the choice of the beneficiary, that they should be affordable and fair. And we need to make sure that we are practicing fair lending practices and making sure that we are always keeping consumer interests at heart, that they need to be data-driven and outcomes-based. We can't just design something for the sake of it, but we need to know its impact. We need to be very transparent with that impact, which is the next guiding principle: transparency and accountability. We want to create a level playing field for a wide variety of new talent finance instruments, but we want to make sure that they are transparent so we know about them, we know the impact they're having, we know any unintended consequences they may have, and they are held accountable as such. That we empower workers, that we want to make sure that talent finance instruments are giving workers more choice and more opportunity, that we are giving them access to flexible, adaptable instruments that are portable and can follow them and can have them access any opportunity that makes the most sense for them and their life and what their goals are. That we want these opportunities to be accessible, and that includes for the business community, to make sure the business community has more access to financing opportunities to build the workforce they need to compete on, but also that more small and mid-sized businesses have access to new financing instruments that are currently not available to them. So we need to understand the heterogeneity within the private sector and what instruments need to be built and tested, particularly for small to mid-sized companies or new collaboratives or networks of companies that choose to engage in joint procurement or purchasing of new talent finance solutions. And then finally, but most importantly, equity-based, that talent finance should be a vehicle to achieve a more equitable talent marketplace. And we want to make sure that we are being held accountable for that every day. We think if we kind of stick to the old way of doing things, we are going to perpetuate a lot of the inequities that are already there. And we think this is a real opportunity to design new talent finance instruments and a new supporting infrastructure that could actually move the needle in a very significant way to achieving our goal of a more equitable labor market and talent marketplace. Next slide. And we had this event series. So we want to make sure that we not only put the paper out, but created forums for us to talk about the various themes, goals, and recommendations therein, and to invite a lot of stakeholders to those conversations to weigh in with us on why they think this is important and where the opportunities are to get started. So it all began with the kickoff forum on September 22nd, where we kind of unveiled the Talent Finance Initiative. We moved into a discussion on the 24th around building partnerships, where we principally heard from Tom Donahue, the president of the U.S. Chamber, as well as Johnny Taylor, president of SHRM. And both of them talked about the need for private sector leadership, the opportunity for partnerships, and how this has to be an all hands on deck approach all across the country. And they teed up two kinds of partnerships, which led to September 29th and October 1st. On September 29th, we talked about where there are opportunities for public-private innovations to take place around the actual financial instruments themselves. So understanding where, where are the innovations, whether they are outcomes-based financing models, career impact bonds, income share agreements, new uses of TIF dollars, any number of new innovations that are out there. We wanted to start understanding what are the partnerships that need to form to actually implement these on the ground with public sector partners and with the private sector. And then on October 1st, we had a conversation about the enabling infrastructure. So understanding that it's not just about the innovations, but what are the various component parts of the infrastructure needed to help those innovations grow and scale and become more available to learners and workers. And there we talked about the emerging data and technology infrastructure that is necessary to learn about what are the outcomes of these new financing instruments and how they can inform risk measurement, assessment, and scoring, but also looking at what are the implications for quality assurance systems. What are the new QA systems that could send the right signals to both the learners as well as to those providing the financing products about which pathways get what kind of results, which could help underwrite a better financing solution. And then finally, we move before I do that, one of the other pieces of the infrastructure we mentioned was employer partnerships, that we're not going to get to scale by having just one-off employer engagements with talent finance solutions, but through efforts like the Chamber's Talent Pipeline Management Initiative and other efforts that are bringing employers together as teams, as networks, as collaboratives. It's a real opportunity to engage dozens of companies at a time where they could jointly procure, purchase or share and implement a talent finance solution where they're all benefiting from the pipeline that they're creating. So new opportunities for collective action and how to facilitate new talent finance instruments consistent with this new kind of collective action we're seeing on the ground. And the time couldn't be more pressing. So we're excited to move through those first 4 forums. And the goal of this forum is to really hear more from you. So we wanted to lay out what we've done to date and get your reaction to it. So this is where I'm going to invite you to come back to Mural. And if you go to section 3, which Chief is unveiling for you right now, you could click on that in your outline. It's going to navigate you, and you're going to see a whole bunch of check marks and then boxes underneath. There's 4 boxes. The first is interviews and best practices. The second one is the white paper. The third one is forums like these and panels that we hosted. And the other one is other. If one of these was really helpful to you, we want you to drag one of those check marks and put it in the top part. So exactly where you see that example. So let us know which of those were, you could put more than one down across. We just want to know which of these things that we did over the past few weeks was valuable to you. And then in the bottom part, we encourage you to create 1 or more Post-its, as many as you like, and write any comments that you have for us. Anything that you like that you'd like to see more of, or something that we could have improved on. But we know we're just getting started. But what we've shared with you today has been a paper. It's been a set of pre-recorded interviews and established best practices that we've been sharing via media channels. And then we've been hosting this event series, these virtual forums, hosting panels with experts. So we just encourage you to add any kind of check marks if you're participating on Mural. Let us know what worked best, and any comments you have would be deeply appreciated. But I'll pause there. And Peter, I invite you to make any just comments or observations about the past few weeks and kind of what you've learned over the course of these forums, but any reactions you might have to what you're seeing in the Mural as well.
No, I mean, I think, when we started this work, we didn't quite know where it was going. And I think, the framework that we've created to kind of look at, the issuers and the users of this is probably one of the more important things that came out of this, because it helps frame it up. And as I was thinking about, the very, very early stages of, talent pipeline management, we had always talked about aligning incentives. And I think this took it to a very different level that's critically important as we think about how are we actually going to help people, find the opportunity to skill themselves up. And I just saw a lot of different folks that are engaged here across, multiple different, areas. And so I'm looking forward to kind of continuing the conversation. But, as I think about how do we scale this, we've spent so much time investing in creating employer collaboratives. And it seemed to me, a lot of innovation can occur in that space, partly because when you think about how, various employers or various organizations can come together to form a cooperative. If you think about the cranberry cooperative known as Ocean Spray, part of it recognizes their strength in coming together and the ability to optimize, their product and also not, replicate other things. And so I think this idea of how do we collaborate differently, with the employer sitting in the middle becomes critically important. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's one of the ones that I took away as we began to work on this.
Yeah, it's just interesting that there seems to be a clear point of view that the interviews that we did, the best practices we highlighted in the white paper were useful. Not sure if we're getting the same level of support for kind of the forums and the panels that we hosted. So it'd be great if folks, even if you didn't think that was important, to maybe weigh in on the comment box about how it could have been done differently, or how it could be made more of a valuable experience for you all. But any comments you can offer would be welcome. We appreciate the kind of signal of what worked. But any comments about how to make it better, or what about it works for you, or what could be done better, we would find that deeply valuable. So keep working on that. And maybe in the interest of time, Peter, I'm going to keep us moving. So if you could bring the slide deck back up, I'd like to show the next 2 slides, which is just reminding folks, again, that we're really focused on 2 types of partnerships to go forward. If we're going to take action, we need one group of folks who are actually designing the talent finance innovations and working in states and communities to implement them and learn from them. And then there's the second bucket is, of course, the folks who need to build the enabling infrastructure to support their scaling. But here is, again, it's too small to see, but it's a visual of the framework that you could find in the white paper on page 22, which shows you how we're organizing the talent finance ecosystem. And it reflects different purposes of financing, upside opportunity and downside risk management. And it also shows you different types of issuers and financing partners, different types of recipients and beneficiaries. We need products for all of them, and different types of channels that could be used to actually funnel those investments. So, Peter, one thing I wanted to ask you is, based upon the conversation we had, particularly in Forum 3, where we started talking about what are some of the talent finance innovations that are already out there, but that could be made better, or wholly new ones. What are some things you took away, or kind of lessons learned?
Well, I think this whole idea, of the income share agreement that Sheila Bair talked about in one of the early interviews is, illustrative of the kind of, risk management and risk sharing that we're putting into this. And, when I think about, the challenges we confront in light of the pandemic, and how do we help folks that, not only need the income, but also need to find a way to upskill themselves, that we've got to find new and innovative ways to support those folks, because we know, folks that are already in the workplace have other obligations, and we need to find ways so that they can stay, focused on supporting their families, but also find the time and effort to probably do short-term credentials that put them on a very different pathway. And so I think there are things we need to be thinking about how do we support individuals, and part of it is, how do these collaboratives of employers working with financial institutions come together and find new ways to support talent and finance it. And so those are some of the things that I took away. And then I guess the final thing, as I thought about it some more, is really the critical role that career guidance and counseling is going to play in this, in order to support everybody. When you think about the role that an effective career coach and counselor can help with individuals, but also begin to point people to employers and to training programs that create good results, they're going to be, a really valuable tool in this, both to strengthen the outcomes, but also to mitigate the risks. And so those were some of the things I took away. And I'm not sure, what your feelings are, but those, begin to kind of hint at kind of the breadth of things that need to be put in place.
I think something that stood out to me, which could help actually bridge us into the next slide around the enabling infrastructure, is the role of employer collaboratives, and getting more employers to actually come together jointly to leverage a product could be a game changer, particularly for the financial services sector, but could also be a real opportunity to streamline and target a wide variety of public sector investments. And I've had a conversation with a number of different firms that are out there who are trying to explore, for example, equity-based financing products like income share agreements, career impact bonds, or other names that they go by. And instead of kind of having where you have groups of companies coming together, that really helps mitigate and reduce the risk substantially of achieving the kind of outcomes you're looking for, which can actually structure a better financing product. But employers could begin pooling their own investments and creating their own products and funds, or being able to contribute towards a larger fund that someone operates on their behalf. And it's one that private sectors can contribute to, as well as employers, but also where the public sector could target investments, particularly where those pipelines that are being built are reaching the kinds of opportunity populations that we're trying to create new and better pathways to opportunity for. And that includes a wide variety of populations who face barriers to accessing and completing education, as well as employment pathways. So I think there's a real opportunity for a new generation of collective action, starting with employers engaging in joint planning and procurement of talent finance solutions. And we can actually get a lot more skin in the game. We reminded folks that employers put an incredible amount of money into both tuition reimbursement, estimated to be as high as $60 billion annually, and depending on how you want to count it, nearly $200 billion in direct investments every year. If we got them channeling those resources via these new talent finance solutions and actually starting to jointly merge their resources and investments, it could be a game changer for lots of states and communities. It could give new employers and the private sector a new pathway to be part of the finance solution, not in ways that are competitive with public sector investments, but in ways that are going to tremendously benefit the kinds of public sector innovations and how loans grants, and even how certain tax treatments could be rethought or reimagined to better leverage and incent those kind of private sector solutions and leadership. Because in the end, by changing the incentives, you're actually going to guarantee better outcomes and more targeted outcomes, which is the end game here. But I did kind of want to share other ways that we've talked about the enabling infrastructure. It's not just about those employer networks. It's about revisiting our human capital accounting practices and how we report on the types of investments that are made and the types of outcomes that are achieved. We need to create the right incentives with how we account for investments, so it's not treated as cost or expense, but is treated as an investment in our infrastructure, as R&D. It's treated beneficially. It is seen as something that should be rewarded and encouraged, not something that should ever be seen as a loss. Quality assurance systems. We need to make sure that we have a new generation of quality assurance signals that are communicating to learners the diverse pathways and new financing products that are available to them and which ones could give people like them a better result, individuals that kind of share a similar profile, and to make sure that we understand that employers need better quality assurance signals. So if the private sector and the financial services sector want to activate more in different and more diverse pathways for even different learner populations, we need to make sure that there's at least a little bit, if not robust, quality assurance in place to talk about the outcomes achieved by a lot of non-traditional providers and ones that can potentially secure the business community stamp of approval. We also talked about the emerging data infrastructure that'll tell us more about what learning happens and with what outcomes than ever before, and how that could be used to inform financing, and how a new risk infrastructure could be a game changer here. Identifying, measuring, scoring, assessing risk is something that happens all the time in the financial services sector, but we don't do it in the human capital domain. And what we've tried to argue, it is to our detriment and actually helps contribute to more inequitable outcomes, not mitigate them. And then lastly, of course, state and federal policy is such a key piece here. But Peter, any observations here about the enabling infrastructure that you want to call out for our audience?
Well, I think there are a couple. One is really this idea of where you were with the employer collaborative, which is, as the work we do here in Houston, many times I hear our employers, particularly in the same industry, sometimes, a certain employer may be up with a good contract and sometimes they may be down, but being able to share their workforce and they collectively share that workforce, this whole idea of how do you capture the value of the investments the industry has made in those workers and make sure they stay in that industry becomes a critically important point within that. And I think there's some examples out there like captive insurance companies that are intended to kind of create that cooperative structure, but also to capture value and, share risks in a very different way. I think this whole idea of the, learner and employment record becomes critically important because it really helps employers see, where folks have been, skilled and developed their skills, as well as who are some of the other employers. Once again, I know many of our employers look to that piece of it when they, because internally they know who does really good skills development. And so I think a more robust platform that helps folks with, those learner and employment records. And, as we all know, at the end of the day, quality assurance is going to ensure that we can, in many respects, hit the guiding principles that ensure equity and fairness and transparency are there. And I think that quality assurance, effort has to be critical in that space. So those are some of the things that I took away, but all of them are relevant because I think incentives change behavior. And I think that's, what we fundamentally have to do in this space going forward is really how do we change behavior? And the best way to do that is through incentives, not through, both regulation or just hoping people do it.
Great. Thank you, Peter. If everyone could go back to the mural, we're going to ask you to do one final thing in this opening presentation. And this is arguably the most fun one. So we hope you're hanging with us still for those who are using the collaboration tool. What we're going to now ask you is what should be prioritized in the future? And there's a number of different things one could do. So if you click on number 4 in your outline, on the right-hand bar, it's going to zoom you in on what should be prioritized in the future. And this is what we're going to ask you to do. In a little bit, we're going to ask you to make comments, but we want to actually do a vote. So we've identified a number of buckets here that could help focus the work going forward. And what we are going to do is allow you to vote 5 times. So we're going to start a vote. You'll have 5 votes. And what you need to do to vote is put your cursor over the words and just click once with your mouse. It's not going to make a noise or anything like that. But you'll notice you'll have a tab up top. It'll say you have 5 votes and it'll go down to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. You'll have 30 seconds to a minute to vote. Just click begin voting if you're going to participate. It should say at the top you have 5 votes. Just click on the words and you could vote for something more than once. So if you want to throw your weight behind a particular topic area, you are welcome to do that. You could kind of go all in or just pick 2 areas. But you have 5 votes to use. And the goal here again is we can do a lot of different work. We can work on federal policy, state policy. We can continue to collect best practices and feature interviews. We can hold more of these forums and networking events. We can do more research, put out more white papers, playbooks, and tools. We can focus on the data and technology infrastructure in the context of talent finance. We can focus on prioritizing pilots and demonstrations in states and communities. We can explore the quality assurance systems. All of these things and more are here. They're all potential areas for us to explore. They're just topics right now, but we want to kind of see, do any topics kind of rise to the top? And if so, which ones? So we appreciate you taking the time to get your votes in, and we're going to see what the results look like. All right. So looking at those results, and I'm not sure, yeah, we're pulling them up on the Slido as well. They can be a little hard to read, so we encourage you to look at the mural. We can pull these back up later, but it does look like we have some clear winners. Peter, do you want to make some observations about what we're seeing as the top 3?
Well, obviously, it looks like pilots and demonstrations, which are critical if, people are going to scale, is you need demonstrated success to then figure out how to standardize and move something forward. Obviously, we've always considered employer leadership and collaboration as essential, and those seem to be the kind of the top 2. And then you begin to get down into, continuing the research and reports, which I think feed off of, pilots and demonstration, because you're going to have to validate and report on it. And then really, this whole idea of, policy alignment is going to be critical. And we know that's one of the biggest challenges any of us that are doing work in this space faces, in terms of the multiple different federal and state programs that all have differing kind of qualifications and requirements that then, make it very difficult for a user to navigate that system. And so the better we create that alignment, I think the more effective, and we're going to be able to optimize both public investment as well as private investment.
Yes, and Peter, I think looking at the results of the vote here, I think something that may have happened here as a flaw in our voting process that we will probably go to court over now is someone had put a Post-it note there, and some people clicked the Post-it note, so the Post-it note got 7 votes. But I think it was intended for forums, events, and networking. So if you actually combine the Post-it notes with forums, events, and networking, it actually beat out state and local policy, beat out the research reports, playbooks, and tools. So I think there's, if I'm reading that correctly, and sorry for the confusion there, but it looks like that came in as 3rd place. So more networking events and forums. So
what you're telling me is there's no voter fraud here. You can't be political. I'm sorry, I can.
That's our hanging Chad there.
Great response.
But this was great. So what we encourage you to do then is close that view out, and we'll be able to bring that back up for future discussion. But we'd encourage you to close out the results and put any comments you have under those buckets. Let us know what you think about that topic, why it's important, and more specifically, what's the work to be done in that bucket? What do we need to do there? What specifically should we do? Or what are some ideas you have? So any comments are welcome. You can embed questions, any kind of direction at all. This is your opportunity to provide free response. Just double click in the box. You'll be able to generate a Post-it note. You can resize it. You can add whatever script you want. Just throw it in there. Doesn't have to look good. We'll organize the content, but we would love any additional feedback, not just on the topics that should be prioritized, but also on a little bit more specific in terms of what the work is to be done. We also accept any commentary on our ability to facilitate a fair and free vote. Okay. Well, if we could come back to the slides, what I would like to do is close out this initial segment. And
Jason, you want folks to continue to do work on this space, correct?
Yes, this is your whiteboard. So continue to leave comments on any of the fields that have been open to you thus far. Do not close that browser out, because when we come back to the panel in just a few minutes, Peter is going to be reacting to it, so you might want to look off that mural when Peter's drawing any additional attention to it. But also, we're going to reveal 3 more areas for you to leave Post-it notes and comments. So you don't want to miss that opportunity. We want to keep getting your feedback. So it's open to you. Go back and add whatever you want anywhere in the mural that's been available to you while we're going to be covering these last few slides and listening to the pre-recorded interview. So please, by all means, keep collaborating. That's the point of it. So one thing we want to highlight for you is we're not done. We're just getting started. And the next thing we want to kind of put on your radar as we close this 5-part event series is our digital magazine. So you've seen the white paper. If you've opened it, it's rather voluminous, but now we're going to put out a new version of it. And what this new version is going to be is a digital magazine that takes excerpts from the paper and embeds multimedia content. So it's going to kind of break the paper up into bite-sized chunks. And instead of it just being the paper, as great as it is with all the text, it's going to embed interviews and best practices and elements from these talent finance forums that we hosted. So we wanted to make it a more interactive, media-friendly experience. So you're going to see that later this month. Our target is to have it out by the end of October, and we'll notify you. Again, it's going to break the paper up, and it's going to embed best practices, videos, and interviews. And if it goes well, this could be kind of a living digital magazine, and we can over time keep adding more and more content as it becomes available to us. So it could be a great interactive experience to explore the talent finance movement and network. Next slide. I want to remind you what our ask is of you. We bring this up all the time. Number one, tell us what you're doing. This is really about building upon your best practices, leadership, and engagement in the space. We want to add to your work, not the other way around. So we really need to know who's leading in this space, who's doing something different. For those of you who find those guiding principles compelling and that framework to be useful, we want to hear your story, and we want to amplify your efforts, learn from them, and help proliferate them, or help tell your story at the very least, whether it's in the digital magazine or featured in a future forum. Next, we want you to get involved. We may be hosting some upcoming design workshops using collaboration tools like the one you experienced today, but what we really want to do is start designing either new talent finance instruments or rethinking some existing ones and how they could be redesigned or reimagined and then piloted. So we encourage you to get involved, be part of one of those teams that we need, whether you want to actually do the pilots and demonstrations on the ground in communities, or if you want to work at getting the enabling infrastructure in place to scale them. We need both and. We need to work with both teams. We need to organize the work to be done, but we need you to help drive it. We want this to be your initiative, not ours. It takes a village. It takes a community. It's the only way we're really going to change this ecosystem and infrastructure. And that's the third one. Make this your initiative. And everything we do, the U.S. Chamber Foundation, we want to downplay our role. It's our privilege to kind of bring folks together around a topic area, but now it's up to the Greater Houston Partnership. It's up to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. It's up to Working Nation. It is up to SHRM, who is prominently featured in our series, as well as all the various organizations. It's up to you. We need you to be a leader in this space, and we need you to take ownership of pieces of this work. And what we will do is provide the forum. We will help convene. We will help make sure that people see the forest from the trees, but we need everybody pulling together. And this will only be successful if talent finance becomes your brand and your initiative, not just ours. So please share in this opportunity with us. We just really can't wait to collaborate with you. And on our final slide, as always, we like to share our contact information. So this is a team that kind of brought this first batch of work to you in talent finance. It has the Chamber Foundation, Bob Sheets, a consultant to the Chamber, the team from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Peter, our good friend from the Greater Houston Partnership, and of course, Working Nation, who you're going to hear from on the panel next. But these are the folks who've been the tip of the spear as of now. And we encourage you, if you know one of us, reach out to us. If you want to meet us for the first time, reach any and all of us. We're all working together as a team in this. It's going to take a village, and we encourage you to find one of us, talk to us, let us know who you are, and come get to work with us on this. So with that, we are going to now pivot to the next part of our agenda. Thank you for participating in this opening presentation and experimenting with this new tool. And what we're going to hear now is a pre-recorded interview with Raphael Bostic, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And then immediately following this short interview segment, we will be joined again by Peter Beard, who is going to engage in a panel discussion with several of the co-authors of the paper and some of our strategic partners. And Peter will be making use of the tool. So again, don't close that browser, keep it up. We'll share the link again if you did, but we do have a few more questions that we'd love to get some comments from you all on. So with that, I will pass things back over to our team to tee up the video.
So thank you so much, Raphael, for being here. I'm honored to get a chance to talk to you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. This is a great partnership that we are embarking on. I'm very excited about what it's going to bring for workers all over this country.
The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has really been a dynamic and really important leader in education and workforce space. Why is that, do you think? Why do you all care so much about this issue, and how does engaging the private sector in training help to meet your mission at the Fed?
I think for me, and the way I think about this is, the Fed has a mandate, and that mandate is to get maximum employment. And if we're going to get maximum employment, we need to make sure that every worker that is out there has all the tools and all the opportunities to be fully contributing to our economy. And what we know, as we were just saying with the disparities, is that that's not the case all the time. And so the bank has really committed to making sure that we're going to try to reduce those gaps and get as much out of every person as we possibly can in terms of their productivity. And then on top of that, so that's the system, that's the Federal Reserve System more broadly. Our bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, has really taken on an additional mandate, which is to increase and improve economic mobility and resilience. When we look across the 6th District, the Southeast U.S., which is where we have our jurisdiction, what we see are a lot of places where we have people who are on very flat trajectories. They're not economically mobile, which is very difficult to work through. And then many who are not resilient, so that one bump can really set them off and put them in a very, very difficult place. And if we think about this maximum employment mandate, dealing with economic mobility and resilience is going to be one way that we help people do more and be more productive in our economy. So we have really wrapped ourselves around these and really lifted them up as big priorities. Now, you also asked about engagement with the private sector, and I've got to say, one of the joys of my job is really to talk to private sector people and hear from them about what's working in the economy, what's not working, where are they seeing challenges, and where are they seeing opportunities. That's certainly important when we think about monetary policy and just understanding the trajectory, the broad trajectory of the macroeconomy. But it's also really important when we think about job training. So one of the things that we hear when we talk to business leaders is, where do they have needs? Where are there gaps in terms of what the workforce can provide? And we can take that information and really flip that around and say to training institutions, to nonprofits, and to educational organizations, and say, look, here are places where there are opportunities for workers, and you might want to develop some training programs to fill those gaps. And then the other thing that we do, which I really appreciate, and is one of the reasons why I love this job, is that we as the bank will often partner and work with institutions, nonprofits, and the private sector to deliver those training programs, to experiment and see what works. So one example is the Greater Promise Partnership, where we actually are taking in interns. We give them a paid salary, but the program also wraps them around with nonprofits who provide life support, and also a specialized program in education, which is quite important. Another example is here in Atlanta, where a number of the largest employers, some of our most significant ones like Home Depot and Delta, have partnered with the Atlanta Technical College to develop specialized training programs that provide pipelines to jobs into those organizations. And we've been able to participate through the Atlanta Committee for Progress and through our staff to provide advice and guidance to the developers of that program so that they have maximum impact. And so for me, I think without the voice of the private sector, it'd be much more difficult to do those things. And so I'm really grateful for the support that we've gotten, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all the great things that come out moving forward because of them. So I'm going to thank you in advance for all that you're doing, and I look forward to you guys continuing to be a partner with us moving forward.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon, and really are grateful for your partnership and your leadership. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
So I wanted to welcome you all back, and joining me will be Stuart Andreessen from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Jane Oates from Working Nation, and then the infamous Bob Sheets with George Washington University and with the U.S. Chamber Foundation. Our whole conversation here is about how to move this forward. Obviously, please continue to work with the tool. Also remember that the chat function is another place to both provide comments as well as if there's feedback on the use of the tool. I'm sure Jason and the team here would appreciate that. So Bob, Stuart, Jane, welcome. So, you got to hear some of and see some of the comments. Did anything strike you as important or interesting or surprising?
Well, I'll kick off and I'll just say that I think that one thing that's clear to me is this is a new field. And the more that we can pilot and prototype and show that these models can work, is our first step towards really changing a system and scaling. I'll actually point back to, just examples of how financial institutions can be a part of this. There have been, growth in alternative staffing firms that have looked to find ways to scale. And as they've figured out that they can show that they're profitable businesses, lending to those has increased significantly. They've done that through CDFI investments and kind of unusual and new partnerships that at first banks and other entities that are involved in helping to scale those things said, hey, we don't know how to understand this. And I think that what I saw today in some of the voting is that we've got to continue to find ways to pilot that, to highlight leading examples and find ways to help drive scale and prove that there are benefits to these models.
And I think you're right on that, Stuart, and the others can comment. But, when you look at the community development financial institution movement, that started and then scaled, and it had the support of, increased capital, but with quality standards that allowed that scalability to occur.
Yeah, Peter, I was just amazed at the enthusiasm. I'm sorry, Bob. I was amazed at the enthusiasm. We've seen from the first forum, many of the same people come back for more. And that just shows me that they're really enthusiastic about trying to be a part of this movement. And with their participation, this movement will really make a difference.
Bob?
Yeah, Peter, I'd like to just build on. I was intrigued by the first two priorities and the possibilities of combining employer leadership and collaboration and the pilot testing with really innovative instruments and putting those two things together. I'm really excited about the interest of those two priorities and how we pop them together, and then the implications for the infrastructure we need to build to support and scale those financing innovations that involve employer leadership and collaboration.
No, and that's clearly one of the big issues. And I saw some comments, on the page related to tell us what works, but also tell us what to avoid. And I think that's part of being in an experiment and prototyping is you learn and kind of learn forward and not try to create the massive institution to begin with. Did anything else? I think that. Oh, good.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think that those two things definitely go together. Not only how do financial institutions get involved and help scale these things, but how do HR managers, how do people making strategy decisions for their firm and how they're going to spend their training and other supports for workers make decisions around this? And we're really hoping to help prove a market there too, which leads me to I'm very excited for the next steps with the SHRM survey on this.
And if I can also emphasize that by combining employer leadership and collaboration with financial innovation, we then creates context for medium-sized and smaller companies to do financing strategies that may not be workable for them without employer collaboration.
No, and it goes back to this idea of cooperative, almost a cooperative of sorts that, shares the risk across multiple organizations. So it's not unknown in that space.
It also shares risk, but allows you to take actions of a larger company. So it really has two advantages. It allows you to develop a capacity for taking advantage of these financing instruments, as well as, Peter, what you just said, better sharing risk.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Jane.
I love the comment that someone's looking for resources and tools to help tell the story, because people realize that to get both people to try something like an income share agreement, or employers to really buy into using their tuition assistance dollars differently, they're going to have to be armed with not only the data and the kinds of information that we can give through other past practices and best practices, but also they're going to need a way to convince real people, real small business owners, real, prospective students that this is worth the risk. This is better. This might be better for them.
And I was going to ask you about the storytelling, because I'm sure you were the one voting multiple times for that one.
I had the whole team on. No, actually, I thought that was great, because I think some of the stories that will be in the magazine will be really interesting, because again, getting real people to say, I'm going to try this is going to be difficult. People are really, hurting right now, and really not very trusting of entities or individuals.
No, and I think that's right, because as you know, telling the stories to inspire folks to consider something is an art that really needs to be important, because it makes it real for people. I mean, in many cases, we think if we just deliver the good information in a very sterile way, that'll motivate folks, and we know differently. And I think, I know some work that you're going to share, at some point, is really the work you found in the American Worker Survey, where it was about stories. It was about, having a good experience and an inspiration, that there's a lot of optimism out there.
And you'll see, Peter, that just as we found on that survey, nobody was interested in federal policy alignment. People have really lost faith that the federal government is going to lead, and they're looking much more at local solutions, which has always been the place that's most innovative.
Well, and when you think about, the welfare to work legislation, it was the innovation of states that helped bring that forward. And that's going to be the type of innovation. And I think there's actually a comment on the board related to, not waiting for the feds to act.
Well, and the truth is that these days, federal policy is state policy. I mean, you look at what the workforce, WIOA, or so many other programs are. There are guardrails that states have to operate in, but there's the opportunity to really drive policy one direction or another in there. And you can't think about innovation without thinking about state.
Yeah, I would also like to reinforce what Stuart just said.
Absolutely.
That they've been leaders in exploring innovations and incentives for employer training, so that we can learn a lot from state and local and regional innovation that can be scaled.
And what are the qualities of scale? I mean, one is, obviously it works. Two, it probably begins some standardization with some ability to customize, but you can't deliver a customizable solution 100% of the time. And then it's kind of the density of folks for the uptake. Bob, do you have thoughts on scalability, qualities of scalability?
I think there is, and I want to come back to the employer collaboration. There is, scale can happen by employers better working together to share practices and collaborate where necessary and move. And again, to me, I keep coming back on scale is to really expand choice for all employers. That principle, we got to have something that can allow medium and small companies to scale as well. And the other one I want to point out is on that comments on the data and technology infrastructure is if we really believe in outcomes based as a guiding principle, data driven, then for employer collaboration leadership to work with these new financial instruments that may be public and private both, then we need to have a data and technology infrastructure that allows a platform to enable scaling based on the guiding principles of data-driven, outcome-based.
Bob, I think your point about small business is so important. I mean, we need big businesses to kind of fund and seed the beginnings of this. But if these kinds of programs don't work for small business people, going back to Peter's analogy about the Cranberry Collaborative, if it doesn't work for small businesses, they're the people creating jobs. I mean, if it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work.
No,
and let's think about this initiative is trying to find ways to build infrastructure that drives there. We have examples that show that these pencil out and provide business value. They help make firms more competitive. We've seen it from big firms. The question is, how do we get that replicated in other big firms? How do we get it driven down to where small and medium-sized firms can do those same things? Think about an HR manager at a small firm. They may have two hats. They may be the HR manager. They may be the logistics manager as well. They may be the chief financial officer, and they're putting those on and off. And I think that one of the things that we need to think about is they don't have the capacity to build out a training program for the one or two skilled workers that they may need, but they and their 4 or 5 competitors do. An intermediary like a chamber of commerce can help play that role, can help build that program. A business association can do that, where 5, 10, 15 people go through that program. They go to different places. It's shared investment, so there's some shared risk. And then there's enough to where it makes sense to run that program. We've got to build that out.
And Bob, I want to
know that it works, but replication and scale, all numbers.
Bob, I want to kind of expand that a little bit, because one of the comments on the mural is related to playbooks. And if you think about kind of this opportunity to scale, you've got, these workforce boards that have, business solution, departments that are working with small and mid-sized businesses, as they do the talent acquisition. It seems like this idea of playbooks and then leveraging an existing infrastructure might help us scale. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's all those possibilities. And the most important thing we want to do, I think we want to have employers to have choices in how they put together collaboratives and how they choose and work with intermediaries. So all employers have, because you're not going to find one solution for every type of industry. You're just not going to do it. And for every type of employer, I think we need to have more choices in how we build those collaboratives and intermediary relationships, ones that are employer facing. I think that's the biggest challenge, because I build up on what Stuart was saying, is we got to have people who are seen as experts in putting together and advising on choices and putting together finance instruments and managing them in a way that's appropriate for the limited time and bandwidth of a smaller employers. So I think the cornerstone is allow for multiple choices of employer collaboratives to put together those partnerships.
And I'm now going to ask Chief, we'll continue the conversation, but I'm now going to ask Chief to kind of bring up, questions 5, 6, and 7, which are really asking folks, will you join us? Who else needs to be at this table? Otherwise, who's missing? And then any comments you might have, both to inform kind of the balance of our conversation here, but also to inform our work going forward. So, feel free to post those comments and sticky notes in those sections, and we'll be tracking those. Jane, you've been in multiple roles in your career, and it's obviously a distinguished career, both in leading a statewide higher ed, and then obviously at Employment and Training Administration. I mean, what are your thoughts right now in terms of what would be critical next steps for talent finance to go forward?
Well, I think the way that being the only non-author on this panel, the way the authors put together this paper really reflects how we should move forward. I mean, there was such a great effort to include every kind of example. I watched as you all really struggled with finding different and innovative examples from a vast, array of players. So I think that's really important. I think that when people ask for a playbook, yes, you want to know what to avoid. But I think people need to understand that what worked in Trenton didn't work in Newark when I was heading New Jersey. You know, the right path for one of the community colleges wasn't the right path for some of the others. But what the winning strategies are in partnership, really creating those public-private partnership or partnerships across the same kinds of entities. You know, for community colleges to come together in a region and say, you be the expert in healthcare and I'll be the expert in tech, and we can find different financial vehicles for those, rather than have the same employer, you know, have to go in 3 different directions with 3 different community colleges. The employers are key in this because they're the ones that hold the magic of the job. So we've got to make it easy for them. And I think each community, you know, when I was at ETA, when you looked at who got the funding, who won the grants, and they were all peer reviewed, and, you know, there was no politics involved. It was purely merit. But when you saw who won, it really was very interesting to look at regionally. Sometimes it was really innovative nonprofits. You know, sometimes it was people like Goodwill. Goodwill was one of the greatest performers when I was there. So when you're putting together these models, don't assume that a nonprofit can't deal with an ISA. Don't assume that a workforce board can't deal with an impact bond. I mean, because we've seen that in local areas, people rise to the challenge, and it's very different who the lead player is depending on that geography.
No, I like this idea that you brought up, and we can, you know, obviously continue the conversation about how do we make it easier for employers, 1, to share their information, and 2, to find out who to collaborate with. And, you know, in an environment that is resource constrained, how are we going to actually optimize those resources, whether it's, you know, negotiating among community colleges, or, as you know, in many cases, community colleges and school districts all have to have, an advisory board of employers, which seems hugely inefficient if what you're trying to do is at a regional level and in a multiple, with multiple employers.
And part of that is federal legislation, right? In the Perkins Act, you're required to have an industry advisory board for every different thing that you do. So even though we don't expect much from the federal government, we may have different things to ask of them in terms of modifying current legislation. Wouldn't it be an innovative effort if there were one, advisory board for healthcare in a region, so that the same employers didn't have to choose between going to K-12 when they were doing career academies, or going to the community college, or actually going to the nursing program at a 4-year. I mean, they're giving the same advice. Why couldn't they give it to everybody at the same time? And I think it's the same thing with finance. Many of these programs, if they're not of a certain length, don't qualify for Title IV aid. So it's going to make some programs hungrier than others for alternative financing methods.
No, and I think that's right. Is you can actually not necessarily change the legislation, but potentially ask for the variance.
Right.
So that you can actually say, here's an application and this is what we're trying to do.
That's right.
Bob, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd like to build what James was saying. Is like, no matter what you do on a playbook, it's always going to play out differently in different local areas. But what's most important is that any sort of solution or partnership that's put together is based on some of those guiding principles of data-driven, outcome-based. That you have to get better fast. You have to learn fast based upon data, and common focus on outcomes. I think then it's those playbooks will then be customized to the local area and be improved and managed better if you have that data infrastructure. Many times we put together these partnerships and they don't have the information and the data sharing necessary to manage their partnerships. And without that infrastructure in place, and right now it's also, we only have that infrastructure in place largely for the public side. We don't have the infrastructure necessary to drive alternative pathways as well as alternative financing mechanisms. So we need a public-private data infrastructure that can support state and regional and local innovation.
And the more transparent they can be, not only about how they're doing something, but who they're benefiting. I think transparency builds trust. And if people see in a local area that you have a diverse network of individuals that you've put through some of these alternative financing methods and they've succeeded, whether they're older workers or they're women or they're people of color, but also the other end, that there are different employers that you've helped, that you just haven't gone to the big names. Oftentimes, I think people are dissuaded from using a lot of public service because they think, oh, they're not big enough or they're not important enough. So being really transparent with who you're serving, how you're serving them, and what the results are, Bob, I couldn't agree more, because then you're going to get greater buy-in. People are going to say they're not hiding anything. They're being very clear with what they proposed to do, what challenges they had, and what they did.
And also, we've all been in the situation where we're moving around best practices that are not backed by evidence. And so the issue is whatever we want to do on innovation, if they're based upon those guiding principles with a supporting data infrastructure, then we know not only if you'll get better at optimizing your results for your region, but any sort of transfer of those innovations to other areas will be based upon certain outcomes that are fully transparent. We have better trust in that they will get results.
And Jane, Stuart, before I come to you on kind of an equity issue, I want to remind folks, we want to know, will you join us and how you might do that? Who else should be at the table? And, any other comments that you want to provide to us. I see we only have one comment. And so I'm now like, Jason's going to find, I've no or other more. So, click the question and feel free to put a Post-it. Stuart, I know one of the big issues that, obviously Atlanta, the Atlanta Fed is looking at is around equity and an inclusion. And, Raphael, really has a passion around that. And I was wondering how you think about this in light of equity and inclusion.
Let me put things a little bit into perspective. Just broadly, without getting too deep into any statistics, we know that from the COVID crisis, people of color, women, and young workers have been significantly disproportionately affected by job loss. Many of it may be permanent job loss, and people making less than $40,000 make up the lion's share of those who have lost their jobs. Now, we've known for a long time, for a lot of reasons, including past discriminatory policies, that a lot of people don't have the assets to really make a long-term investment. And some of these tools help level that playing field. Now, we need to make sure that they're done in a fair and reasonable way, that these are not new tools that are putting more burden on people who started with the least. But we've got to expand access to middle skill jobs. We've got to expand access to high skill jobs. We've got to expand all different types of trajectories that people can be on. And it's absolutely critical. When we don't, there was a recent report by Citigroup that said over the last 10 years, we've lost maybe nearly $16 trillion in GDP due to disparities and lacks of social mobility. That's real money. That's really significant loss for the economy. So not only on our president, Raphael, has said, not only on moral reasons do we need to eliminate this, but on economic ones too. Now, I think that helping to find ways for people that don't have the same level of assets or time to be able to make investments in traditional training programs, these help level the playing field. They're one of many tools that can help do that. We expand options and choice for people that may prefer one financing model over another.
And on that 16 trillion, is that the Larry Summer work that was recently done to say what the impact of the pandemic will be on the U.S. economy in the long run?
No, this is a different piece, and we can share this with participants. I can find the link, but this is from Citigroup.
Okay.
That looked at looking back over the last 10 years disparities.
Oh, okay. I know which one you're talking about. But then there was also this recent one that Larry
Yes.
Summer did in terms of what the cost of the pandemic is. And I think it raises the big issue for all of us to consider is, are we going to get a huge ROI if we actually invest in the talent of the United States and have, the world-class workforce, one, that we need, and two, that we deserve? And it's actually, probably a high ROI if we actually invest wisely in exactly the populations that Stuart's talking about.
Yeah, and I'll actually say I think that we should think about some of these drier areas. They didn't receive a lot of votes, but there's, we talked a lot about the active portions of talent finance, but there are a lot of these passive ones. Making sure that we have the right data infrastructure to prove that we're actually benefiting frontline workers and that we're actually benefiting disadvantaged workers is critical. It's more passive and it helps set the market. But without it, it's part of the pathway to scale. It's part of the pathway to take a really successful local program and having that grow really big. That's true for things like HR accounting. Imagine that small firm that's making a decision between a 3D printer and a new training program. Now, one comes with tax advantages and one doesn't. We need to do all of the things. We need to build the pilots. We need to prove that they work, but we also need to set the tone to where those can replicate and grow. Both have to be done.
Thanks, Stuart. Jane, I know you probably have thoughts on this as well.
Well, look, I wish that so many people in Georgia, in Kentucky, in Minnesota didn't have to die to get us to realize that we didn't have an equitable society. But I think we honor all of those people and their grieving families if we really commit for real to engage everybody. And that doesn't mean going for, pandering to one group. It means everybody. You look at your community and say, who really needs a step up and how do we message to them to get them to believe that this time we're sincere? Because so many people, white and of color, have totally not, really benefited from the experience. They played by the rules. They finished high school. Maybe they got a certificate. Maybe it wasn't a quality one. And now they're in the same boat. They're laid off. Tens of millions of them, and how many more to come. So I think we have to, somehow decide when we do this in a local area that we really live the message, just like you authors live the message. I mean, I think it's important for people to know that, yes, the people that you see on this panel and Jason were the authors of this paper, but they invited almost 30 people to come and poke holes in it. I was one of those hole pokers. And that takes a different mentality. Very easy for 4 or 5, Sarah's not on either, brilliant people to sit down and write a great concept paper that they want to have meaning. But these guys really put it to the test from the first draft. So I think that's what local areas have to do. When people decide to do this, they have to be willing to listen to everybody, listen to the voices of their community, and make accommodations and adjustments to really meet those needs.
I'd like to also emphasize, again, keeping with the I was doing the data theme, but what I'm impressed by all the different innovations we got submitted to us is what outstanding results like employers are getting and leading providers are getting in promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. So we need to actually use data to define leading practice to help us move forward. And so I think I was just really impressed by many of the great ideas submitted to us during the writing process.
We have about 5 more minutes, and there are a couple comments related to who's missing. One is the education sector. Another are kind of the local workforce investment boards, as well as, state CTE. And so I think, those are probably valid in terms of, kind of where I think Jane had taken us, which is how do we connect differently with the school districts and the college systems in a good way.
Yeah, and I think people should feel good that, Jason has already had outreach. Sometimes we forget four-year colleges, but the reality is that a bachelor's degree and beyond are still going to be very important in whatever the new economy actually is. We're still going to need doctors and lawyers. We're still going to need engineers. So getting those four-year colleges to the table, I know, is something Jason's working on right now. Where do they play in this? Community colleges have always been a huge part of it. And I think, the CTE piece is very important. We need to make sure that we're going in different regions. Sometimes it's the secondary CTE in a region that's the strongest, and we shouldn't be afraid to engage them and to see if they can grow to accommodate some adult learners.
No, and I think to your point, Jane, 4 years are critically important, but we know there are a lot of pathways into the economy directly out of high school, partly because it's work-based learning, whether it's auto techs or construction, you're going to learn on the job. And so, all of those are going to be needed. And so once again, it's got to come together. Stuart,
you've done such great work on that in with the partnership, Peter. You know that's real.
Yep. Thanks.
And so from that, I think that these are absolutely sectors that we need to engage more and pull in. And I think that just to get back to our equity discussion, it's critical that everyone have equitable access to all of these. We need to make sure that these are not pathways for one person or another, that where you start in life is predictive of whether you're going on one path or another. That being said, we need the ways to do that. And I think that there's some great examples from local workforce boards like the San Diego Partnership and thinking through new financing. There's great examples like Purdue University of how you can use these tools for 4-year. They apply in lots of different places, and we need to think about the pros and cons of all of them. But we ultimately need to create pathways that go through all of these for our whole economy.
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce the idea of expanding choice, not expanding choice in alternative pathways, but expanding choice in alternative financing instruments that provide better opportunity for all and expand, especially in improving equity.
No, and I would agree with you, Bob. As I was prepping for this today, I was, struck with the fact that, we recognize that there are millions and millions and millions of people who are unemployed. And how do we help them, one, have some sort of financial stability as we provide the opportunity to upskill them? And I got to thinking, in home finance, you've got the home equity, line of credit. Should we be thinking about a TLOC, which is a talent equity line of credit, which is trust people and who have the skills, give them enough resources to get them to the next side? Obviously we had that with some of the unemployment, from the CARES Act. But we also ought to be thinking about different innovations in that space that leverages the fact that these, many people already have equity, and how do we invest in that equity and give them that bridge? And I don't know whether that resonates or not, but that it just seemed to me that's another way to think about how to get financial resources to individuals.
Also, Peter, just the current situation shows us we need to rethink very systemic shocks for employment and income risks in ways we've never thought through before. And this is a time to learn and learn and innovate from this experience.
It reminds me of what we heard earlier in the series from Sheila Bair. If you've got an acceptance letter to a program that has proven value, you ought to be able to get some type of financing, some type of support that acknowledges the promise of the program that you're going into and the value that you're going into.
And that's why it's so very important for us to really innovate on how we measure and assess risk. And that's just one example of an application.
I know Jason's itching to get back in here, but I want to give you the last, you all kind of the last comments before we bring Jason back to close things out and remind folks that, we're building a movement and we need their participation and support going forward. Let's start with Stuart.
I will just say that I am very excited for 2021. I'm excited to learn about what's been happening and how we can help support it.
Bob?
I'm just thank for everybody who's contributed such great ideas throughout the process. And I think as a network, if we stay with a network, we're going to learn faster together. from a public and private perspective.
Jane?
And Peter, I would just end on what I've been saying throughout. Everybody involved in this movement is completely sincere. They're humble and they really want to move this forward. Everybody has a shared interest in seeing each individual part of this country move forward in whatever direction is best for them, but move forward with new financing models.
And I'm just going to summarize kind of what everyone has said, which is one, thank you all for who participated with us through all the various forums. And this one, your contributions are critically important. And then Bob mentioned the network. One of the things I remember reading a long time ago is a single fax machine was worthless. Two became a little more important, but when everyone had fax machines, that network allowed folks to communicate in a different way. And the same thing with the internet. And so I would reinforce this point is we're building a movement, but we're also building this network to actually create value for everybody. And I now want to kind of turn it back to Jason to close us out. So thank you all, Stuart, Jane, Bob. It has been a pleasure working with you. And I know this is not over. And Bob, just think about what happened in Nashville at the airport.
Yep. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Series. I did want to just remind you what's to come. This, like I said, we're just getting started. So what you're going to see is all of these forums are now going to be on YouTube. So you can go back and watch them. You can share them with colleagues and friends. 4 of the forums are already up there. And in the slide deck, we actually include the links. So once the slide deck goes out, you can easily find them via that link or just search for them on YouTube. And this 5th and final recording will be made available no later than tomorrow. So those are there, and we encourage you to get them in the hands of folks who should be part of this conversation. In addition to the videos, we, of course, have the white paper available on our website. We'd encourage you all to share it with anyone who may benefit from that and who may be interested in joining this movement. I wanted to highlight again that at the end of the month, we will be releasing a digital magazine, one that we hope to add additional content to over time. But you will find in that digital magazine excerpts from the white paper. But alongside the core text, you will find a variety of multimedia content, best practices, interviews, and other media that can help bring that content alive. So we got the YouTube videos, we have the white paper, we have the digital magazine, and we will also have the SHRM survey. So the Chamber Foundation is collaborating with SHRM to go out and conduct a survey with the business community to gauge their appetite to pursue new talent finance innovations. It is our hope that we will be bringing much later in the fall the results to you to kind of get a sense from how business is thinking about this and how we can meet them where they're at. So that will be another update coming your way. We are still working through a potential series of design workshops where we want to have more interactive experiences with those who are starting to form this network. And what I wanted to highlight for all of you is ways in which the Chamber Foundation is committed to building this talent finance movement and committed to collaborating with all of you. We have a number of things already underway. We're not starting from scratch. We talked, in fact, it was one of the highest rated or voted on categories, which is employer networks and collaboration. Well, with our talent supply chain networks all across the country, we already have hundreds of active employer collaboratives already managing their talent pipelines, and they are natural test beds for piloting new talent finance solutions. So we want to make sure that all of those folks who are offering new and innovative loan products, equity investment products, insurance products, we have collaboratives of companies who are already getting the work done on the ground where talent finance solutions are a natural extension of what they're already doing. So we think we can really help scale pilots, not just with individual companies, but with collaboratives of companies. And we have an infrastructure to start with right away. We heard early in the series from Kentucky, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, Ashley Watts, the president CEO. And in Kentucky alone, we have, I believe, 28 now active employer collaboratives statewide. In cities like Phoenix, we heard from ASU. In Phoenix, we have 4 employer collaboratives, and there really are hundreds all over the country. So we want to leverage that infrastructure that's authentically employer-led and make them now the new customers of talent finance solutions, but we need the public sector to work with us. because they are working with their preferred provider networks for newly trained and credentialed talent, as well as to kind of upskill and grow their workforce. They need not only the financing partners, they need the partners who are helping deliver the training and credentialing, but they also need public sector engagement. So where can the public sector really help take their work to the next level? And Kentucky was a great example of a public-private partnership that really helped proliferate and scale an employer-led movement much faster than almost anywhere else. So we are committed to leveraging that infrastructure, and we have several, that network's called Talent Pipeline Management, TPM. We have several TPM engagements still planned throughout this year, and we will be bringing talent finance to them and finding out which one of our TPM networks are ready to go and be part of this, the ready and the willing when it comes to talent finance. Within our T3 Innovation Network, we're working with partners like Bright Hive. We heard from Matt Gee and Forum 4, but we're working to build the data infrastructure of the future that's going to make learning and employment records possible, where we can capture all learning regardless of where it happens and understand the outcomes associated with that learning, both in terms of employment as well as earnings. We are building that infrastructure, and as we continue to build it in the T3 Innovation Network and with the support of so many partners, we will now bring talent finance to them to make sure that as we build new data collaboratives to actually aggregate these LERs, de-identify them, but learn from them, we want to make sure we're learning from them in ways that improve how we finance and invest. The work is already underway. Pilots are already happening globally. We mentioned quality assurance as such a critical piece. Already we have a group of innovations or partners that are leading innovations, like we heard from Equos in one of our forums, Forum 4, and they're exploring the next generation of quality assurance, and we want to partner with them and others like them to figure out what are the right types of QA signals that we can start building in states and communities so they can be leveraged in ways to provide better pathways opportunity using alternative finance instruments. We talked about HR accounting and how we need to change how we account for and report and incent employer investments in training and development. And we heard from SHRM and their interest in this space. So we want to work with SHRM to build on the conversations that have happened to date, but to finally push through and actually advance a set of reforms on how we actually account for talent investments and development. And then we heard about the risk infrastructure. We need a new risk infrastructure that could let us identify, measure, and assess risk in ways that allow us to do something about it. And we think this is going to be one of the new pillars of more equitable talent marketplace. If we can't understand, assess, and identify the risks that are unique to you, how can we possibly provide the right finance solution and pathway that can best meet your needs? This is an infrastructure that needs to be built. It's been built many times over in other sectors, but we want to actually create a space for R&D where we could bring together a new group of leaders to explore the risk infrastructure of the future for the human capital domain. So these are all things that, for the most part, we are not starting from scratch. We are actually building talent finance onto existing movements and infrastructure, but we want to get further along to those pilots and demonstrations, and we want to leverage all of our employer networks, the chamber community and family, the businesses that make up our membership. We want to get all of them involved in this conversation to now proliferate and scale innovations across the country. We think there's no greater need than right now. Now's the time. So we don't want to sit on the sidelines anymore, but we need to be the tip of the spear on this, and we're inviting you to join us. So we think this is, the tagline on the paper was it's a return to investment, and we really think that's true. Now's the time. We need a return to investment, and we think employers in the private sector can demonstrate how they could use their resources differently in new and innovative ways that get better outcomes. But we can't do it alone. It has to be a public-private approach, and this is just the beginning. So please do join us, join this movement, be part of the coalition of the willing. Work with us. I do want to thank our partners, the Greater Houston Partnership, Working Nation, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. You all have been terrific in helping us put together the white paper and this event series, but we want to grow that table. So while these were kind of the founding partners, we want to make sure we are growing this group considerably. So join us, become part of this core team going forward. But I do want to thank everyone today and all those organizations for their contributions towards this effort. Of course, I want to thank our funders again. Without them, this would have just been a conversation at a Nashville airport, as Peter referenced. But because they had confidence in this effort, we now have the beginnings of a movement. So thank you, Cognizant Foundation, Schmidt Futures, JP Morgan Chase, Google.org, and Microsoft Philanthropies. But most importantly of all, thank you to our audience, for all of you who have participated in across all the forums. And for those who have reached out to us, who have already had meetings with us, and those who have already signaled to us that they want to be part of the solution. So we will continue to grow this movement. We are in it for the long haul. We are leveraging every tool and asset at our disposal to make this initiative a success, but it will only be a success if Talent Finance becomes your brand and your initiative. So help us help you. We want to make sure this is something that can actually make a difference in people's lives, not be a wonky paper that sits on a shelf. So now is the time to roll up our sleeves and take action. We hope you join us. And remember, if we change the incentives, we change the talent marketplace. So thank you. And with that, we'll bring Forum 5 to a close.